Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to another video on my channel. In this video, I'm going to go over specific tips that I think are helpful in choosing or selecting a graduate school. So I was originally going to sit on this chair, but as you can see, it's been taken. So I'm just going to plop down here on the floor and go try to tell you some important tips. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Bilal Moise. I'm an MD PhD student at the University of Maryland. My PhD focus is in bioengineering. I'm very interested in the blood-brain barrier, optimizing delivery of therapeutics across the blood-brain barrier, specifically for the treatment of rare neurogenetic diseases. So some of my PhD work focuses on that, but I think ultimately that is what I would like to do in terms of my overall career. So that's just a bit of context to give you an idea of where I'm coming from as I talk about my perspective on graduate school. I'm currently finishing up my graduate school training, so I think a lot of this stuff is still super fresh in my mind. These are things that I've thought a lot about when I was first selecting the graduate school, or my mentor and the graduate school program. And then from there on, things or ideas that were reinforced throughout the duration of my training. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to select a graduate school. The process of applying for graduate school is a bit different depending on whether you're a regular graduate student or whether you're doing an MD PhD. Obviously, as an MD PhD, so I'm going to obviously speak about it from the perspective of an MD PhD applicant. And when you're applying for graduate school or an MD PhD programs, you're obviously doing everything through the AMCAS application. Now, when I was selecting MD PhD programs, obviously I had to consider the medical school and aspects of that part of the program, but when it came to the graduate school, there were a few things that I also took into account. And so when I was doing this, I was looking for institutions where there were multiple research mentors that I was interested in working with, regardless of what department they were actually in. What I mean by that is I think to sort of have a bit more flexibility as an MD PhD, at least that's how it worked for me, because you're not so much worried about which graduate school program you're applying for, whether you're doing neuroscience or biomedical engineering or computational biology. You can sort of decide that later on. So I looked at mentors or PIs in all those departments, and I tried to find schools where there are a few, at least like 4 or 5 that I would like to work with. What I don't recommend is choosing a school where you have one mentor that you're really interested in, but the rest of them are people who you don't want to work with. And the reason I say that is because that person can leave. And that's actually what happened to me. When my number one, the PI that I really wanted to work with, she actually left halfway through my second year of medical school. So I had to find a new PI at that point. And I mean, for me, fortunately, it worked out really well because there were a lot of options. The PI that I selected ended up being a fantastic fit for me in terms of the research and the mentorship style. So I'm very thankful that things worked out the way they did. But I bring that up because it's really important to keep that in mind. You really don't want to end up in a situation where that person leaves and you're kind of stuck in an environment where you can't really find anyone else or any other research lab that you would like to work in. So I think that's probably the number one factor: the strength of the research program and the availability of research mentors that you're interested in. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is that I think is really important is location, because as a PhD student, you're going to be in that environment for about 4 to 5 years. And as an MD PhD student, it's even longer. It's about 7 to 9 years. And so for that reason, I think location is a huge factor to consider. So for me personally, I ended up back here in Maryland, which is where I grew up. And throughout the entire duration of my program, both the MD and the PhD, I've been a really good support system. My parents are here. I have friends that my childhood friends, people that I've grown up with, my whole community. It's right here. And so I've never felt lacking in terms of socialization, community or family support. All those things have been here for me. So that's a really big factor, I think. But sometimes you're going to have to leave home, right? So just make sure when you do that you really take the location in mind. Is this a place that you actually enjoy? Like, does it have things that you're interested in, like hiking, or I don't know if you're into fishing or going to the beach, like those sort of things. Those are all kind of, I think, really important things to consider, because your PhD and your training is so mentally grueling that you want to make sure that you have things to do that are fun, that kind of take you away from the stress of it all. And location plays such a huge role in determining those things. And then also, so kind of an offshoot of that, and also related to location, is the cost of living, because location obviously determines that as well. So you have to sort of consider whether the place that you're going to live in financially suitable for you, and that's obviously like a bigger factor, or if you're in a relationship, if you're married, if you have kids, those sort of things. So location, I would argue, is really the second most important thing to consider after the strength of the research program or the availability of research mentors that you're interested in. So those are probably the two main factors, and now we're going to get into sort of some of the more, I guess, nuanced or minor factors to take into account. So I didn't know about this because, partially probably because I'm an MD PhD student, but not all graduate programs allow you to do rotations. Some are direct admit only, which means you select a mentor beforehand, and then that's pretty much the person that you work with. Whereas other programs have a rotation program where you go in, you try a few mentors, and then you decide the lab that you're interested in. I always thought that was the case for every single program, and I think that is the case for every single MD PhD program that at least that I know of or that I applied to. But it turns out it's not necessarily the case for graduate school. So the reason I bring that up is because I think the rotation aspect is really important, because you never really know like what you're interested in until you actually do it and you have hands-on experience. And the second thing is you don't know if you're going to be a good fit in the lab and the mentor and all that. So I think looking for programs that allow you to do rotations is really important, because it sort of gives you flexibility. It allows you to make that decision once you're there in person, rather than before you've ever stepped foot in the lab. So I think that's a bit minor, because like I said, most programs should have that rotational component, but it is something to consider if you do encounter a program that doesn't have that. And then another factor to consider is, and this is more specifically for MD PhD students, is how integrated the MD and the PhD programs are. So one of the advantages of doing an MD PhD is that some of your coursework for medical school can count towards your graduate school requirements, which would then exempt you from taking those courses, giving you more time to focus on your research and therefore accelerating your progress in graduate school. But I think so that's also something that you should consider when you're looking at these different programs, like how integrated are the two programs, and how much benefit do you get from being a medical student in the PhD program. So you'll notice that I didn't really touch on the coursework, and that's because I don't think the coursework itself is that important. I think you learn a lot sort of on the job or on the fly as you're doing your research. That's really where those concepts will stick. So I don't think the actual courses are that important. So I think that's pretty much, I think those are like kind of all the factors that I could think of, or probably more important factors that I can think of when choosing a graduate school. So next up, let's talk about picking a mentor, which I think is probably the most important decision you'll make in graduate school. I remember I talked about the rotational programs. This sort of comes into play here because when you're rotating through labs, you get to see things firsthand, and it allows you to make a more informed decision. But let's backtrack a little bit and let's talk about, in general, what are some things you should consider when you're trying to pick a graduate school mentor. The first one, obviously, is, do your research interests align? Is this work that you're very passionate or excited about? And do you see yourself being able to come into lab every single day? Or if not every single day, do you see yourself being able to work on it for 10, 11, 12 hours a day at times? Sometimes working late. So this is something that obviously is really important. You want to make sure that the research topic is so exciting that you're internally motivated and driven to answer the questions that you're investigating, to find those answers for the questions of your research investigation. So obviously this is pretty obvious, I think. I think the second thing is probably more important though, and that is making sure that you have a good personality fit with your PI. So this is where you would consider things like, what is your PI's work style? What is your work style? How compatible are those? Are you someone who is fine with working a 9 to 5? Does your PI require you to work a 9 to 5? Because some PIs do, and they're pretty strict about that. Others are more flexible. You can come in whenever you want, which, for me, for example, that works a lot better because I like having that flexibility. Sometimes I like working late, or I should say mostly I like working late hours rather than early morning hours. So how compatible are you two in terms of work style? What are the expectations between you and your PI? So for example, in my case, I am required, my PI wants me to send a progress report every week to update her on my research progress. And for some people that might be a little too much, but I think it was great. I think it really helped me stay organized, stay on top of my data, because I was basically formatting and presenting it every week. So whenever I had to like go and pull a figure for a paper or a presentation, I usually had those figures on hand. I just have to look up a progress report. And it really helped me stay organized. So I think for me, that was super beneficial. But for other people, that might be a little too much. It might be a little bit too much stress. It may not be a good fit. So those are things to consider. Another thing, obviously, is funding. Does your PI have the funding for the specific project and for your position in the lab? That I think is, although it's kind of an awkward question to ask at times, I think it is a really important question to ask, because sometimes their funding may last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you have to switch labs because they don't have funding for your work anymore. I think another thing that it's kind of hard to ask, and a lot of people don't know about at the time that the PI themselves may not know about when you're trying to join the lab, is sometimes you should try, if you can, try to get a sense of like what their position is. Like, are they happy where they're at right now, or are they planning to move? Because I know quite a few people who have started working in a research lab, and then maybe three years down the road, their PI takes a position elsewhere, and they're sort of in a hard position where they either have to decide to go with them and sort of start over in a new environment, or I don't want to say start over, but continue their research in a new environment. So they're starting over in terms of settling in, housing, figuring out like their personal lives. But the other side of that is they stay where they're at, but they sort of have to start over in terms of the research. And I've seen both sides of it. So I think getting a sense of that is also really important. But yeah, so those are just some quick tips off the top of my head as far as selecting a graduate program and a research mentor. That's all I can think of right now. Maybe if I was sitting in my chair, I could think of more ideas, but that's all I can think of for now. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll tune in next time.